it seemed to be working itself out in the first kind of go-round, that somebody higher up in the Park Service, despite the rescission of the permit, said, no, let them go ahead and be there. And we just don't know how long that lasted.
Yeah. Well, I will certainly. I hope to speak of that with more information at a later time. But
all right.
Also wanted to ask you guys if you knew anything about the Continental Congress 2.0 that was going on in Philadelphia over the 4th.
I do not. No.
And another area of information, because I know they were trying they had actually started with. They started last November trying to put together the Continental Congress, and I know they proceeded, although they didn't have nearly the turnout that had been hoped for. But they were in the process of writing a new constitution, and I understand what had been voted on was going to be presented to both the president and the Congress prior to the was it November 6th vote?
Wow.
Interesting.
That is
I'll have to
interesting.
check up on that.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that. There were, I just think it's wonderful when people get together and talk about these issues. I no matter what the group is,
or
size of the group, but getting together and actually hashing some of this stuff out, it's wonderful.
Well, you really gain the most creative ideas that way, because you don't, you're only aware of what you're aware of individually, but you combine together and you get that opportunity to add ideas together and come up with what's the strongest.
To learn so much more and be able to become, maybe more directive in what you're trying to accomplish. What we often find in conversations is the most knowledge gained is by listening.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Well, you guys keep up the good work. I sure appreciate you, and I love the idea that you're able to stay on the air longer than what we had hoped even.
Yes,
So.
well, thank
Thanks,
you.
Garth.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
As Garth mentioned, we are staying on the air for 10 more weeks. This is the first week of 10 more weeks, and we're super excited about that. So keep listening. And as we go to our first break, I just wanted to tell you we have a song that was written by Woody Guthrie. It's actually not sung by Woody Guthrie. This is Land Is Your Land, and we're going to play the lost verses. These are the verses you usually don't hear. And I am thinking that maybe this was a song that was played by the Guitar Army at the National Gathering. So enjoy.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. In the square, in the city, in the shadow of a steeple, by the relay of office, I saw my people as they stood hungry. I stood there wondering, is this land made for you and me? Is this land made for you and me?
Was a great high wall there that tried to stop me? Was a great big sign there said private property? But on the other side it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me.
Yes, sir. That side was made for you and me.
Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking that freedom highway. Nobody living can make me turn back. This land was made for you and me.
This land is your land, everybody. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me the endless skyway. I saw below me the Golden Valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island. You can't sit down from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water.
to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was
Chair City Supply, a 55-year-old distributor to the furniture industry, now has a product line designed just for you, whether you're a home hobbyist or professional cabinet maker. For years, we have stocked many quality brands of product for the furniture industry. Now we are able to offer you the same quality products in pack sizes that fit any custom woodworker's requirements. Chair City Supply offers a wide selection of cabinet hardware, professional custom stains, any type of screw or hinge you need, everything to complete your project with style. Visit us at chaircitysupply.com to order today. That's chaircitysupply.com.
T-4 and counting.
Hello, this is AirOccupy. We're back from our little break. I hope you enjoyed the Woody Guthrie, the Lost Verses. The other thing we wanted to talk about today, in addition to the National Gathering, we wanted to talk a little bit about privatization. When we were talking about doing this show, we thought about doing individual privatization issues, privatization of public assets, and we realized, wow, this is a huge issue. So we're kind of broadening it today, talking about the concept. And in a little bit, we'll be talking with David Cohen, a founder and chair of In the Public Interest. And we'll be talking with him about this. He's a expert in this area. So,
Yeah, over the course of the weeks of doing the show, think about doing topics. Privatization has been on the list every week. I mean, we see what's happening here with the St. John's River Water Management District and the proposed sale of lands, the proposed privatization of Florida prisons, the proposed privatization of Medicare, public schools. There's a long list. So as we thought about this over the last couple of months doing the show, we thought, we need to do a show on privatization. But as Liz was saying, when you delve into this, it gets into a much broader and deeper area, ranging from the sale of public assets, public lands, to the leasing of things like grazing rights and mineral extraction rights, all the way down to the outright outsourcing of certain public things that we've always considered to be public functions, like the Postal Service and public education and our prison system. Then there's just a whole huge area of government contracting where specific discrete things are, like IT services of a state government, are put out to contract, and that's largely how the Defense Department works with a lot of procurement and contracting. So as we got into this, we realized that perhaps the way to approach this would be to do a show today where we talk a little bit about simply the broad concept of what it means for the government to privatize or sell off functions and assets that it's in the past been responsible for. And then in the future shows to take on discrete subject matter areas. I know a lot of us at this table were spurred to be interested in this due to what's going on with the St. John's Water Management District and the proposed sale of some conserved lands. I know, Shannon, you went to the meeting last night.
Yeah, I did. And the room was absolutely packed. It was the Volusia County Council chambers, which is a pretty big space, and there was standing room only. I mean, it was packed. A lot of local leaders were there, representatives of Audubon and Sierra Club. It was a really, and citizens, just regular ordinary citizens who are rightfully concerned about what's going on with this.
So the overall proposal is one by Governor Scott to evaluate lands that have previously been put into conservation forever, and to evaluate whether certain of those lands can be sold to private interests, correct?
Yes, the important word there is forever. This is 72%, which would be a supermajority of the voters, voted to preserve these lands. This is a mandate from the public, and it's been reenacted through local government. The county had similar versions at least twice, where voters overwhelmingly supported these lands.
And that's the so-called Florida Forever lands.
That's correct.
That's what they call them.
This is something that every governor has supported. Jeb Bush put aside. Numbers are not my strong suit, but I believe it was $300 million annually for the purchase of these lands. Jeb Bush isn't really known as being loose with a dollar, anyway. So I think that's worth noting. This has been a process over 35 years. These lands were very carefully selected based on science. If you look at the map, all you see is water through the center of these corridors. The purpose of the lands is wildlife protection, yes, but preserving water. Unfortunately, not that much of the lands has to do with recharging the aquifer, which is another serious issue, which I really didn't know until last night when I was listening to the St. John's water management officials. So these purchases were not made lightly. It wasn't somebody funneling it to their buddy. There was huge oversight, just very careful selection of these lands. And if you look at the map, it's evident that they're connected with water, they're connected with forests, they're connected with habitat.
What's the argument for even proposing to sell any of these lands?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. If you read the news articles, I did a search before I went to the meeting last night. Every single major news source in Florida that I found 10 just in a light search, Gainesville, Tampa. All the opinion pieces from the news source itself was, we need these lands. They're very important. The justification from St. John's River Water Management through Rick Scott is that we should examine, and keep in mind this is costing us money, that we should have this comprehensive examination that's already occurred over 35 years to check each little corner, piece, or parcel and see if there might be, this is their words, an almost direct quote, edges or corners that we might be able to sell for a profit, because that makes good business sense to spend this amount of money in a down real estate market to sell edges and corners. Now, the real story is that the West Orange Airport Authority, this is my take, but also has been mentioned in multiple news sources, the West Orange Airport Authority wants to extend a runway near Lake Apopka. And it would, number one, this is a little bit complex, but the thing that people need to know is the way they have created these maps, and this was my point when I was in the meeting last night. In a direct question, the response from St. John's River Water Management about the value of these lands, this is what they said. All of these lands have conservation value, all of them. When we looked at the lands, what they did was made a map of four categories that they overlaid each other. Each category, they're equally valuable. Not one category is less valuable than another. When you lay the different categories over each other, if in the overlay only one or two categories was represented, they then say, according to their color coding, that it has little or no value. They all have value. This is a false measurement. And the corner that has little or no value, of course, is that section over Lake Apopka, which would impact the waterway, but they took out consideration of bird migratory patterns to justify it. So, business sense in this sense means great business sense if you're a special interest group with the governor's ear. Yep. Not such great business sense for the people of Florida.
Which is why privatization is a big problem, because in most instances it survives on cronyism. It survives on people who have the power being able to take the public assets. And one other thing that we probably need to bring to the forefront is the fact that with services, we privatize. When services are privatized, the public is actually paying for it. So it's taking public money to pay for private services. Anyway, it looks like we have a couple calls. We'll go ahead and take AirOccupy. You're on the air.
Hi, this is Donald Cohen calling.
Hey,
Hi,
Donald, how are
Donald.
you?
Good. I'm happy to call in.
Thank you.
If you were able to hear our little intro discussion of why we came up with this topic and how we now view it as being a labyrinth, then hopefully you can, as an expert, give us some insight into sort of the range of issues we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I think what I heard. I think you have it exactly right. There's an enormous amount of money to be made in the delivery of public services. There's an enormous amount of money to be made in financing massive public infrastructure projects. And there's one direction for all that money, and that's to industry that wants doing what they're supposed to do. Really, they want market share, and they see that taking control of public services and public assets is a way for them to grow revenues. It's just that, the problem with that, of course, is it's not in our interest in a democracy.
Right. And one thing that I noticed with, and maybe you can speak a little bit more to this, with privatization, a lot of times the public assets have, the reason that they're public or public services, I'm thinking in particular about like the prison industry, there are other considerations. It's not just about money. With the prison industry, you're dealing with people's liberty, with their freedom. And when you put a profit motive behind that, I think that some of the important points get glossed over.
My question has always been, how can you make a profit off of need?
Right.
Right. Well, and I think there's a discontinuity from the private providers, the private company's perspective. It's all about money. That's the simplest way to discuss it, and that's sort of logical. They're they're profit-making companies. They want to make profit. But like I was saying, the problem is that for what we want to do as a public, and it's not just prisons. But prisons is a great example. But it can go further. But to use a prison example, it's in our interest as a people, as a country, democracy, to have fewer people in jail, more people who go to prison, get out of prison, and get jobs and not go back to prison. That's in our interest. The way that the contracts are structured, unfortunately, and sort of this is the clash between private interest and public interest. The contracts are structured as the more people in prison, the higher the revenues of the prison companies. So that's a contradiction that can't be, a circle that can't be squared, a circle that can't be squared, or what have you. You can't have a set of interests that are working directly against our public interest and have it make sense. And so you could take that example and and translate it to virtually every other service. It's in our interest when you think about privatization of roads, whether they're tolled or not. It's in our interest to get people off the roads. It helps with global warming. It helps with with getting people out of their cars and their commutes. There's a whole lot of reasons we'd like less people driving. It's in the interest of those that finance the road and that depend on a guaranteed stream of toll revenues for 30, for 40, for 50, for 99 years. It's in their interest to have people on the road. So again, it's a clash of interests that you could take and translate to virtually every sector.
And that's a clash of interests that the public is directly paying for. But as you pointed out, I noticed it doesn't always show up that way. We're not always aware just how much we're paying, because once it moves over to the private sector, our ability to control and see what's going on is eliminated.
Exactly. Yeah. No, we don't. We may know the size of the contract. We may, let's separate this a little bit. Those that are looking carefully, advocates and watchdogs, and maybe and media people in the media, can find out a few things. They can find out how much we're paying for the contract. There's lots that we can't find out anymore when something goes, when control goes from public to private. We don't have the right to do records requests or Freedom of Information Act type requests to a private provider, because it's no longer public, it's private.
Right.
So there's lots of information we no longer have. But it's important to remember from sort of general, most of us, us included on this, we're talking right now, we're not really always aware of who's delivering the service, who owns the road we're driving on, or who's delivering the service when they pick up our trash or when our water comes to our faucet. It's pretty hard to be aware of that. And so and if you think about it, if it's water to your faucet that's been privatized, every, milliliter of water that flows through your tap is generating income and revenue for a private provider. And so that's really hard to know. But again, the idea is that they want to get in the stream of tax dollars, of public dollars, and the services and what we pay for public services. And if they're in the stream, then they'll take their piece. And you could say, well, that's what free enterprise, that's what private companies do. The problem is, why should we be doing that when we want when it's more important for our money to be going to public services? And as we know, public dollars are precious. So it's crazy for us to be siphoning off, thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, and in some cases billions of dollars, to companies when we could be directing those dollars into public services and public assets.
As you pointed out, why should if a private company can make a profit, so can we? And you mentioned that about water, and that's actually happening here in Florida with our springs, and the water from the aquifer is being privatized and sold.
Yeah, exactly. It's and it's just, in some ways, I think it's important to think about it a little bit dispassionately first to understand it. And, I don't know the circumstance in the Florida's aquifers, but governments right now are having a hard time raising large amounts of cash to invest in their infrastructure, and so they're desperate and for money because things are falling apart and that we have, and then there's need for new infrastructure to drive us forward and to create a healthy economy and a good community and all of that, and so that's really important. And so the investment community sees the desperation of local and state and federal government to some extent, more state and local, and saying, we've got cash that can solve your problem. So and that's legitimate. Both of those needs are legitimate. The problem is that we end up the public out of desperation sells our stuff. It's just a way to borrow money on fire sale prices, and we give up control of those assets. So we no longer can control what we want with our stuff. So we're paying too much. I mean, it'd be one thing if they just said, we'll loan you money and we negotiate over the interest rates, and that's the deal. And, if we can't do if we can't do public bonding of something because the voters won't accept it and we have to raise money for it, then maybe we have to pay 6% rather than 4%. But these deals don't do it that way. These long-term asset deals says, no, we want control. We want to make sure that there's a revenue stream for the water, for the roads, and for the prisons and all this stuff. And that's what weakens democracy.
How much of this privatization move, which seems to be gaining speed at every level of government, is motivated by this sort of common wisdom that's developed over time that the government is totally inefficient and we need to impose a business model on governance and wrench every efficiency out of every service? How much of that is the influence that led to this, and how much of it is just straight sort of crony capitalism that these people saw an opportunity to make money and they bought the right politician and now they're in the stream of income?
Well, it's a confluence of things. First off, in terms of the belief that government is inefficient, that's a real issue that we have to address, that people believe that's true. But that's not the motivation for privatization. That's the argument that is used. That's the idea that's promoted by conservatives and others, and therefore it's the condition that's taken the belief that's taken advantage of for several types of folks. For ideological conservatives that want to shrink government, or that want to bust public sector unions and shrink the size of the number of employees. That's one group of people that are pushing privatization. They don't believe in government unless it serves them. The second group of folks that are pushing privatization, and they're, these are people that are, real people that are walking city halls and, in governors' mansions and all, throughout the country. They're the deal doers. They're the underwriters. They're the lobbyists. They're the consulting organizations, and these are multi-billion-dollar industry. Just to sort of influence the consulting industry and deal doers that do this, and they make money every time there's a deal. So they're out there saying, we've got a way to solve your problem. You're desperate. You don't have, your budget isn't, your budget's in crisis, whether it's the state of California or the state of Florida or a city or what have you. We've got a solution for you. And here, people believe, government's inefficient anyway. We can save you money. There's a set of arguments they use that aren't based in fact, but they've been said enough that people believe them. So that's the second group of folks. And then the third group of folks is, again, pretty simple. It's just they're looking for market share. So these are multinational and multinational corporations in many cases, or investors. Morgan Stanley, bought the rights to Chicago's parking meters for 75 years. Or it's a company, Waste Management, which is a national, or perhaps they're a global, a trash collecting company, or a Veolia that does, that provides water services around the world. So it's those companies that are simply out there, and their marketing teams, they're just not marketing, to people. They're marketing to legislators and governors and mayors. And so if you put all those together on top of 40 years of attack on government, that people believe that government is no good and private sector is all good, just a little bit of a simplification. You put that in the mix, you get a lot of motion.
Yeah. A toxic brew.
Can you talk about, you mentioned here we have Morgan Stanley in charge of these parking meters and waste management. Can you kind of talk about what the outcome of that is as far as, benefit or cost to the public? Like, what are some of the things that people don't think about that are going to come with having these services privatized?
Sure. Yeah. Well, what happened in Chicago is really just the simplest example, and it's important, I think, to talk about these with real examples because, in the end, it's things that are really happening in our communities. It feels so big, some of it. So, Mayor, when Richard Daley was still the mayor, he made a deal with Morgan Stanley, a consortium of groups, a sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East, Morgan Stanley, and one or two other companies. They offered $1.1 billion to the city of Chicago for the rights to 75 years. They're basically to sell, but it's a long-term lease, but 75 years is virtually a sale, to sell the city's parking meters, all of them, for 75 years to this consortium. Daley comes in. Daley, releases the deal on a Friday. The city council is asked to deal with, to a vote on a Tuesday, and this is true. And here's the position that a city council member is placed with, and the public is placed with through their representatives. Okay, they've got a huge budget crisis in the city of Chicago. They're a huge budget deficit, I should say. There's $1 billion on the table. Take it now or leave it or lose it, and deal in another or cut services, and you don't get to scrutinize this deal. That's what happened. And Daley was a tough mayor, and he had he figured out how to jam this through. So what happened? So then the more important thing is what happened afterwards. So first off, they started to analyze the deal afterwards. Several things were true. One is that even if from investigations by the city's the investigative arm of the city, by outside groups, so sort of a dispassionate analysis. Several things are true. One is even if you wanted to do that deal because you needed the cash and you wanted to securitize or use as collateral your parking meters for 75 years to borrow that money, even if that's how you thought about it, they sold about $1 billion too cheap. They could have gotten a much better deal, even if you wanted to do it. There's other reasons not to want to, which I'll mention in a moment. So that's the first thing. The second thing is people's parking meters, the rates went up fast. The rates went up, the parking meters weren't working, people were really upset. Because, again, there's no free lunch, it's just money. And so if they're going to put $1 billion in, this consortium's going to put $1 billion in, and they need to make it back with a reasonable rate of return as they define it, not as we define it, then they're going to have to raise rates. Because otherwise, we would have raised rates, and, it would have been simple. So they raised rates. People were upset. So the next thing is the devil's in the details of these contracts. They're a contract. They're called public-private partnerships, and those words are really important because it makes the public and the private in a legal contract equal. So a couple of features of this contract, and similar features in contracts like this around the country. One is what's called a non-compete clause. So say that in 50 years, when maybe we live a little, our cities are denser, when we live a little differently, the city council, the local government decides they want to build free parking lots because more people live downtown, and for whatever public policy reasons they want to build free parking lots. Can't do it because they would be competing with the private vendor that owns the parking meters, and we have committed that we won't compete with them for 75 years so they continue to make their money. So think about the impact of that. So that's one. So that's the privatization of democratic rights, of our ability to chart our future. The second, what I refer to as kind of a make whole clause. If the city wants to close streets for any reason, again for 75 years, for for traffic management, for changes in living patterns, for street fairs, temporary closures for street fairs, they have to pay the private, lease owner of the parking meters for every minute of every use of every meter that is closed, that's no longer usable in that period of time, whether it's permanent or temporary. So think about it. You're on a city council. You want to do a street fair. You're going to have to pay $1 million to Morgan Stanley and Lazy Parking, who runs it on a day-to-day basis. And the city budget's pretty tight. You don't even propose it.
Man,
Right,
I never even thought about that. Wow, that is, the implications of this.
Well, we had a bill, the bill that was in the Florida legislature in January, 2 bills actually, to privatize 30 of our prisons, had a non-public disclosure provision in it, where it said that the contracts would not be disclosed until they were executed. So there's not even any public input in the front end of the process.
That's right. That was true in the Chicago case as well, but it's all over the place. When you look at the documents of those that are trying to do these large-scale deals, I mean, they're talking about big money. They're huge investors. They see as risk, and they're defined. And they look at risk again, really dispassionately. And one of the biggest risks for private investors, because money is, time is money. That's real. Is political risk. And so what they need to do and I imagine there's bills across the country looking at this, trying to do this stuff, is eliminating the political risk that a deal could be slowed down or stopped, or some feature of the contract that's to the benefit of the private provider is weakened. They need to make sure as little of those are possible. And what all that adds up to is public participation. So if the public can't weigh in, it's in their interest for the public not to be able to weigh in. Because if we weigh in, it might slow something down, and if it slows something down, it costs them money. It's actually quite simple.
There's another layer of this. I've known, especially since Citizens United, even local races, inordinate amounts of money are going into trying to win these races, much more than the actual salaries of the positions. And I think people need to consider why it would be so worthwhile to somebody to be elected to these positions. We've got a new kind of public-private partnership going on.
Yeah, well, no, it's very clear that the industry, this is a well-heeled, very sophisticated, very comprehensive set of industries and companies and consulting groups and political forces that are sort of moving this agenda in many potential ways. It's a pretty big club, and you're an elected official and you need to raise money for your campaign. It's a reasonable thing for them a reasonable thing to understand, I should say, that you go where the money is. You got to raise $500,000 for your campaign. You're going to raise it from wherever you can. And so the problem is whether it's overt or covert or what have you, is when someone gives you a lot of money, they have influence. That's human nature.
Right.
And there's far more money spent in lobbying than there are in political campaigns, in political contributions. And so I think that's where we're unmatched a little bit as well. There is a massive lobbying industry. That what's different now from 20 years ago is that the private consulting groups and the private companies that want the business are now really good. They really understand how to work cities and states. They got people all over the country now. They didn't have that 20 years ago. So they've got lobbying teams, they've got PR teams, they got folks on the ground every day saying, I've got a solution to your problem, I've got a solution to your problem, and here's the cash.
Do you have a dollar amount on what's being spent that way? I think I read trillions between advertising and lobbying.
I don't. It's massive sums of money. I mean, it's hard. You'd have to really, it'd be an interesting project because the influence industry goes pretty broadly. You have to include everything from direct campaign contributions, independent expenditure campaigns, now this, independent so-called issue stuff through 501c4s that the New York Times talked about the other day.
Right.
You'd have to talk about how Walmart, gives huge amounts of money to companies like Walmart, just an example, gives huge amounts of money to nonprofits and good things in their communities around the country. It's all about one thing. It's all about influence. And in the broadest possible definition. So you'd have to add all that up. It's huge.
Yeah.
What are our options? I mean, you've done a lot of research into this. What can we, the little guy, do to try to turn this tide?
Well, the first thing is there's lots of, you're in a state with an example of this is there's lots of victories. There are lots of folks that are saying, that are winning efforts to stop privatization around the country. I mean, Florida, stopping the privatization of those prisons in southern Florida is an amazing accomplishment by a pretty broad coalition of faith leaders and unions and community folks and a whole bunch, and Republicans. And so that's really possible. And the thing that we argue is that one is that it's people outside of the lobbyists and the advocates, general public, they don't know who gives the service, but they don't want to give up control of it. And so we need to make really clear that what we do is we're giving up control of the stuff that we the people should be in control of. And so that's really important. Second thing we say is, it's bad government. And so, we argue that if you're going to want to privatize, we want to make you do it right. Because we know if you do it right, you probably, 9 times out of 10 and maybe more, you're not going to do it. Because doing it right means you're not getting, you're not selling parking meters for $1 billion too cheap, for example. It means that you're making sure that the public can have a say in what happens. You're making sure that you don't, in the details of the contract, you're not adding things like non-compete clauses and other things that take away our democratic rights. You're not saving money by by making sure that the workers who were providing the service and when they're privatized don't have health care and their wages drop by down to $10 an hour. You're making sure those things don't happen. And if you simply ask, I sent you an article, I wrote on this. If you simply ask these questions and make the city or the state answer all these questions, do the due diligence of what the deal really means for the people, and oftentimes they get to the end of that process and they go, well, this really doesn't make sense. The only thing left is pure political pressure or ideology. Yeah. And that puts them on the wrong side of the people.
Yeah.
Donald, we really appreciate having you on today to take this first brush at what I think is going to develop into some more discrete, specific subject matter areas that are influencing things in Florida. But we really appreciate you giving us and our listeners a broader scope view of privatization. If you were willing, we would love to have you on again at some time in the future because this has just been phenomenal.
Sure, absolutely. No, happy to do it. And Florida is ground zero, and one of many ground zeros actually because of Rick Scott. And, but the legislature has shown their ability to be independent and a little bit thinking. And so so it's a place we pay a lot of attention to.
Good. And what's the website for if people listening want to get more information?
It's at www.inthepublicinterest.org.
Great. Well, Donald, thanks so much.
You bet.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
That was a great conversation. I learned so much. I knew a lot about the privatization issues, but there were things I had never thought about that we brought up. Next week, we're going to talk about Fukushima. We're going to go back and look at Fukushima and what happened with the nuclear problems there, and the nuclear
coming to America.
Yeah, coming to America. All the stuff that's coming to America, but also the new nuclear plants, energy plants that are coming here. And funny, talking about privatization in Tokyo, people are really upset because the government is so in cahoots with the nuclear energy companies that they're going back on their promise to reduce or actually eliminate all nuclear power in Japan. So we want to look at that. I mean, privatization is everywhere.
These are not a people who are really prone to bucking government either. I mean, they're not a people prone to protest, and they're out in mass numbers.
Yeah.
Doesn't help to be lied to about what's happening. There's a new government report out we'll talk about a little bit, a new Japanese government report out on the real story and the real impacts of Fukushima and human error leading to something that may not have been able to be averted given where they sited the plant. But in any event, we'll be discussing that next week.
So that's our show for today. There was a story on Sunday about the food pantries are in dire need of food. So if you have any canned goods or dry goods, please consider dropping them off at your local food bank. I know that a lot of people are hurting, and we want to help them out. So this has been AirOccupy.
Peace.
Corporations don't own us anymore. Corporations don't own us anymore. They don't own us anymore. The gates are open, hear us roar. Corporations don't own us anymore. Not gonna sit around and wait for things to change. Not gonna sit around and wait for things to change. Not gonna wait for things to change. We're gonna rattle the beggar's cage. Not gonna sit around and wait for things to change. 99% can't be wrong. 99% of us can't be wrong. We can't all be wrong, so don't tell us to move along. 99% can't be wrong.
The following program was paid for by the host and does not reflect the opinions or positions of Goliath Radio or this station. When you hear Goliath bark, you know you're tuned to WELE, Ormond Beach.
Voters say the economy is their number one issue. Most voters say they trust Romney over Obama to handle the economy.